Okay, we are live right now. It is May 28th, 2020. We're going to allow participants to start coming in. So we're going to just do a little light introduction. Hi, my name is Doug Lalone. Welcome today to the University Innovation in Response to COVID-19. I'm getting a reminder, sorry about that. We're right on time. Today's conversation is with panelists from various Big Ten schools. Hopefully you can see them on the monitor here now, and we're going to continue having our participants roll in. And before we do our little introduction, just a little bit of background about today. Again, my name is Doug Lalone. I'm a patent attorney with the law firm Fishman, Stewart, located in Troy, Michigan. We help clients identify, secure, and advance their creative works for their clients around the world. I personally chair Fishman Stewart's strategic practice group, where we focus on helping startups, venture capital groups, and private equity firms in their portfolio companies create and implement an IP strategy that is consistent with their exit strategy, and that's important. We'll talk about that today. Of course, our goal is to leverage innovation to increase enterprise value. So today is going to be a roundtable discussion with Dr. Matthew Lionel from Purdue. Say hello. Dr. Jonathan Fay from University of Michigan. Dr. Fay. And from Professor Jed Taylor from University Illinois at the Urbana-Champaign campus, excuse me. So this broadcast today is being videotaped, and we will be rebroadcasting it later on the YouTube channel for Fishman Stewart. You will have an opportunity, since this is a Zoom webinar, to post questions. So you scroll down at the bottom of your screen, your cursor will light up a little control panel at the bottom, and you will be able to share questions with our panelists, raise your hand or chat, and we will see those questions, and you will have an opportunity to get your important questions answered here today. So please be part of the conversation. We welcome you to join us here today. COVID-19 has drastically changed the commercialization landscape for universities. And that's why we're here today talking to three key university individuals. We are joined by the innovation leaders from Purdue, Michigan, and Illinois, as indicated. These innovation leaders will share their perspectives regarding how these universities are pivoting and innovating during the pandemic. In trying to meet with them, I learned they're very busy people. They're doing a lot of things, and they're busy with their labs, have just opened, some of them, and they're busy working with trying to get classes up and running, which Dr. Fay just indicated what's going on with some of their classes. We'll talk about that on their campuses. Now, we're really going to talk and focus on what's being innovated right now at the universities and how their commercialization models may have changed during the crisis. Okay, so quick introduction. Dr. Matthew Lionel of Purdue University is a clinical professor at the Krannert School of Management. He is the director of experimental learning and deliberate innovation for the faculty director in Discovery Park. Dr. Lionel focuses his work at Purdue in working with faculty and graduate researchers to translate the research into practice through commercialization. Again, thank you, Dr. Lionel, for joining us. I love the Purdue archway there. Always can't get enough of Purdue. Dr. Fay of the University of Michigan is the Dixon and Carol Dole Executive Director of the Center for Entrepreneurship. Dr. Fay focuses his efforts on facilitating and inspiring entrepreneurship at the university, as well as innovation. He works with PhDs, postdocs, and faculty members in advancing innovation on the campus. He currently manages the nationally acclaimed NSF Innovation Corps, also known as NSFI Corps at U of M. And we're going to talk about more of that today and get a little understanding as to what that means, as well as he manages a statewide innovation educational programs for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Again, Dr. Fay, thank you for being here.
Great, great to be here.
And Professor Taylor, he is the Executive Director of Tech and Innovation Center at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In addition to working at Tech, he also works with startup companies as an entrepreneur in residence. and enterprise works at Research Park. So Professor Taylor, again, thank you. And I understand, Professor Taylor, you've actually ran and been involved in startups in your past history. Is that right, before being at the university?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
I helped launch a company out of Research Park with the team as part of a team that launched out of Enterprise Works, and we founded a company and was later acquired by VMware. So, and let me just be clear as well. I'm actually not a professor at Illinois. I'm just the executive director and work with faculty commercialized technology.
Oh, my apologies, and thank you for.
No problem. Happy to be here.
All right, and finally, last but not least, Michael Fluhler with Fishman Stewart is a patent attorney with Fishman Stewart, helping companies with their various innovations and advancing and protecting their creativity. Michael, thank you for joining us today. And last but not least, again, I'm Doug Malone, patent attorney at Fishman Stewart. We're going to get started right into our round table set of questions here. Before we met here today, we had an interesting conversation about what's going on the universities. And we're going to start with Dr. Lionel first with respect to that Purdue University. Can you explain for our university as to what's going on now on the campus and just at a top level? Obviously, nobody's attending classes, but are your labs open? Are people innovating? Just kind of give me a quick update right there, if you would, please.
Sure. So it's a little quiet on campus, as you can see behind me. It's actually like this, not just in the picture. You know, we essentially shut down most of the labs back in March. We kept labs open that were working on anything that sort of helped address the COVID situation. Also, we sort of kept going research, which was for national security and or where shutting down the lab would cause some safety issues. We have some agricultural research, which is very seasonal, and so we found a way to keep that going. But back in May 4th, we started phase 1 of our reopening the labs, and in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to begin the phase 2, which is what we'll do is go on a building-by-building basis. We've been working over the past few weeks to kind of sterilize those buildings. And then when those buildings are open, then we'll do it on a lab-by-lab basis within those. So in the interim, each lab director is preparing kind of standard operating procedures to operate safely in the lab environment, making sure people are distant, that they're not people using the same equipment, and so on. So I think within, you know, we aim by around July 1st, I think, to have most of the labs up and running and have that stabilized before we bring students back at the beginning of August. So it's been a very thorough and deliberate approach, and so our leadership, particularly Teresa Mayer, who's the Executive Vice President of Research and Corporate Partnerships, has just done an outstanding job in terms of getting things back up and running again.
Well, Dr. Lionel, it's very exciting to hear that things are moving towards reopening and your labs are reopening and you're continuing your research. And we're going to learn a little more about that as we continue with our conversation here today. Dr. Fay, can you give us a quick insight as to what's going on at the University of Michigan there in Ann Arbor? Are your labs open? Are people innovating? What's going on right now? Can you give us a top overview, please?
Yeah, from the top level, yes. Our labs are starting to reopen. We actually just finished the first phase of reopening. Several buildings were identified as being able to labs be open and still keep social distancing. So those were in the first wave, just a few buildings. That went very well. So now we're actually entering the second phase. I think at the beginning of next week, we'll start to open all of the buildings now in the College of Engineering will be open. But they are also at a kind of a lower capacity. So we're planning on about 30% occupancy of the labs prior to the COVID pandemic kind of occupancy rate. So yes, the labs are reopening. I think the other thing too, that in my conversations with faculty that are pretty interesting, is that they never really stopped doing research. Even though the labs weren't open, you know, a lot of our research, especially in computer science or electrical computer engineering, where a lot of our innovations come from, you know, they do a lot of simulation work. and those students can continue to innovate and continue to prepare. And they're just anxious now that they've done their simulations and some of their designs to actually get back on campus and get back into Lurie Nanofab and be able to actually make a few things and see how they actually work. But a lot of the work continued on because a lot of the work can be done in simulation and in the research. So I was pretty pleased. There wasn't much of a pause. I will say though that similar to Purdue, it's been a very deliberate process. The College of Engineering wanted to be very careful about how they reopen the labs. None of us are interested in having a second wave or a relapse because that would really slow us down. So we're trying to be deliberate and careful in the approach.
Excellent. That's good news as well to hear how U of M is moving ahead and hasn't really been slowed down that much from the standpoint of some of the innovation that's going on. It's very exciting. Yeah. Jed, a similar question for you. What's going on at your campus at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign?
Yeah, very similar to what Jonathan and Matthew are saying is happening at Illinois. Our approach to getting the labs back up and running really kicks in to high gear next Monday, June 1st. And we'll see people starting to clean the buildings thoroughly June 1st. And then over the next several weeks, it'll start ramping up with the goal of having all the labs in the College of Engineering really up and running in first to second week of July. The students will be back in August in that time frame, if not a little bit earlier. But and just like Jonathan was saying, a lot of the labs just really didn't shut down, even though the people were not on campus. They really didn't shut down, and research was really taking place. But again, I was impressed as well with how deliberate and thorough the plans have been, with each of the labs and buildings putting their a lot of thought and exercise into how keeping everybody safe that goes into those buildings. But yeah, so we'll be starting next week, and then with the goal of having everybody back in the next over the next 8 weeks is what our plan is. So, and I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that the faculty getting together and innovating while we were all off campus. But I can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, look forward to hearing about that. Let's get in to some of the questions. I guess more specifically about a follow-up top level question for you, Dr. Lionel. We'll go back through the conversation. Then we're going to ask Michael some IP questions. That's going to be kind of derivative of some of your answers. Can you just give us top level overview as to about roughly how many companies have spun out of Purdue? I have the same question for all the other Big Ten schools here. How many companies have spun out of your universities over the last 5 to 10 years? And then as a follow-on to that, what kind of technologies are now being looked at and innovated during the COVID-19 crisis?
Okay. Yeah, so back in 2013, we formed the Purdue Foundry, whose role was to kind of centralize all our entrepreneurship activities and work with faculty and graduate researchers to move our technology out of the lab into application. Depending on the years that you look at, we're ranked number 3 in the US in terms of startups formed, just behind MIT and Columbia University. And so one report has us at 178 startups, and those are the ones that are based on Purdue IP. Over that period, our entrepreneurship center has really worked with around 300 entrepreneurs to get businesses started, and they've gone ahead and raised $400 or $500 million, created 300 to 400 jobs as a result of that. So it's been a very distinct focus as we've kind of shifted from more of a license-only approach to commercializing our IP to a mix of licensing, joint ventures, partnerships, and startups. So it's so that's on the startup side. As I said before, while we shut down a lot of the research for a couple of months, we did keep a fair amount of research going that addresses the COVID situation, either preventing, containing, or treating the COVID-19. So some of those have been diagnostic tests, which we'll deploy nationally. We're also developing tests that we will use on campus as we bring researchers and students back onto the campus. We've repurposed some of the labs to be able to process and conduct those assays on a very rapid turnaround basis, so we can do a very high volume of testing on campus on a continuous basis. We've had some interesting ones that people have done. We have a lab which is called Continuous Analysis of Many Cameras, and they aggregate data from 70,000 cameras worldwide. So they've adapted their system to really focus on using the analysis of cameras to predict high COVID-19 infection risk in crowded areas. So using the public camera systems to identify where there's a high level of lack of social distancing. So that's been a kind of cool one. We've had another lab which has been really focused on developing, field use tests for various diseases in developing countries. They've pivoted to focus on developing field tests for the coronavirus. We had an interesting collaboration that occurred just a couple of weeks ago. One of the outside entrepreneurs participated in one of our entrepreneurship programs, had been developing a washing system for bedridden patients that to get rid of bacteria that sort of typical systems don't work with. And she needed to get a prototype ready, so we were able to connect her with our 3D printing lab, our advanced manufacturing center, to produce the prototypes, and so that's been able to move forward. So there's been some good collaboration. I know Jed's got some good stories too in terms of collaboration that's been happening. So even though it's not been on a face-to-face basis, it's been through video. We've been sort of continuing to sort of leverage all the knowledge and assets that we have. I think we're all dealing with moving stuff online. So figuring out how to do teaching, how to do some of our research online, how to exchange data more effectively online. Whole range of interesting projects that are still underway.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just scratching the tip of the iceberg there. There are a lot more innovations to be developed, and it's very interesting to see how your teams have been collaborating remotely, so via social distance, and still creating solutions to certain problems. So, Dr. Fay, let's kind of ask you the same two-part question. One is approximately how many new companies have kind of spun out of U of M in the last 5 or 10 years, and also more recently, how would you say the innovation ecosystem at U of M has kind of responded to the COVID crisis?
Yeah, the first question is actually fairly hard to answer. It turns out it all comes down to, what do you count as a startup? It's easy to count the ones that are coming out of tech transfer, and those are the ones that have a university license for the IP that was generated generally through research. That's a very countable number. Typically at Michigan, we do about 15 to 20 a year is the number. I think we actually might have hit a new record this year. That's Office Tech Transfer, I think, did 25 or 26 this year, which is a new record for us, which is a great number. So over the last 5 years or so, we've probably seen about 100 companies come out of University of Michigan, which is a great number. In terms of the other startups, though, I mean, we have a number of student startups that come out. And I think there's a large kind of group of startups that aren't counted through the normal tech transfer mechanisms. Faculty members are leveraging their know-how, engaging with other partners that maybe they've collaborated with over the years. And so those are much harder for us to know about at the university, but they are a very important kind of source of innovation in terms of leveraging our faculty members' know-how that maybe is related to their research, but not directly out of their research discoveries. That's a very important kind of aspect of innovation coming out of universities, is the transfer of know-how through our people and our graduates. Much harder to count, though. in terms of the number of companies that come out of that work. In terms of the COVID-19, here in the College of Engineering, most of our early efforts really focused on how do we support Michigan medicine on the front lines, trying to handle the number of cases. So our folks really dived into how do we reprocess N95 masks. We know there was going to be a shortage, and so the team here really did a lot of testing to come up with a protocol around a combination of UV and steam sterilization so that masks could be reused by Michigan medicine. And that was very successful. I'm a former medical device entrepreneur, and so there were a couple times during the meeting where I was like, people were like, well, we could make things. I'm like, no, 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 no. You're not a production facility. You do not have the controls in place to make things. We can do research. We can try to come up with interesting things, but we should not get into the business of trying to make medical devices on a whim. That is not a small feat. So let's not do that. But there were a number of also interesting cases around personal protection equipment, PPEs, in terms of things that could be repurposed or could be made on 3D printers or other things in more controlled facilities. And then the other thing that I think around that, the Office of Tech Transfer really played a big role as a convener and a connector of people. So because of all the innovation, the work that they normally do, they're used to being in the middle of working with prototyping facilities and local manufacturers and other places, and just trying to make sure that the ecosystem around manufacturing for PPE and others were highly leveraged, and we could connect people together. Because as a university, we are highly visible. People know how to find us. We know a lot of people. And so one of our major roles is just trying to be a good connector to try to make people, help each other throughout the process. And that's really been the focus of our efforts. And then, of course, as a institution, we're all about education and research. So how do we keep those two engines going? And that's where it all feeds into the how do we move our courses online? How do we continue to do research as an institution? So, but that's much more inward facing.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Those are some great numbers. It's very exciting to see how U of M has and continues to innovate during the crisis. And Jed, same question for you. Any idea how many startups have spun out of University of Illinois, and also can you kind of give us an idea as to how they are innovating right now?
Good question. And I am just like Jonathan. It is a hard number to come up with. Mm-hmm. It seems like a simple thing, right? How many startups do you launch? But I cannot give you a concrete number, but let me tell you how I typically answer that. Like Jonathan, I can tell you that our tech transfer office, in the last 10 years, there's probably somewhere from 50 to 60 companies that have launched out of the Office of Technology Management. And then there's a bunch of other ones that go through our programs. And then I think there's a key group that students that are on our ecosystem or in our ecosystem that launch some venture right after they leave, a year or two out. Just before I joined this webinar today, I was actually reading about a company that was started by one of our students that left campus, like maybe he launched this company maybe 6 months after he left campus, and now the company is valued today. It was just on LinkedIn today at about $375 million. So technically, it wasn't launched on campus, but it was launched a few months afterwards. And for us, we look at that as a huge success for our ecosystem, even though it wasn't launched while the student was sitting on campus. Mm-hmm. Now, I think one of the metrics that I often use for our ecosystem in terms of our venture creation is our I-Core program, right? That I imagine we'll talk about a little bit. Over the course, it's easier for us.
Why don't you introduce it right now, please?
Happy to. So I-Core stands for Innovation Core, like was mentioned, and that is a program where we take technologies out of a lab or perhaps another technology somebody else is working on their own, and we run it through a structured curriculum to help them validate an idea. Typically, is what we do is the key piece of this program is that we force them to go out and talk to potential customers to make sure that they build something people care about. Okay? It sounds like a crazy, it doesn't sound like a crazy idea. It sounds like a very obvious thing to do, but it's actually not, and especially on a campus. Typically on a campus, some faculty members building something based on their research that they think everyone will want, right? That they think it's the best thing ever developed that everybody will just obviously want to buy, which we know is not the case. And so it's a critical program, and it's been foundational for, I think, all of our campuses. And we try to get 30 teams as our goal, to get 30 teams to participate in that program a year. And we've run that program for just over 6 years on our campus. Actually, we're about through 7 years. We've had over 200 teams participate in that program on our campus since we launched it in 2013. And those teams have went on to raise over $80 million in follow-on funding after participating in the program. So that's how we look at that. Now, I don't have the specific numbers to show you right now as far as like how many of those teams formed companies, but it's a decent number. But those I look at that as the success of and give you an idea of the number of teams. Most of those teams don't actually form successful companies, but we've had enough that those teams have raised over $80 million in follow-on funding. And those teams are typically at the University of Illinois, and it'll probably be the same at Michigan and Purdue. Most of those teams are based on hard science, right? So there'll be something like phase imaging microscopy, a cybersecurity company. There are not a lot of dog walking apps in those companies. Okay, so that's what we typically see at our programs. So going back to your question about how are innovators on our campus responding to COVID-19, I'll just mention a couple of examples. So one of the examples that I was really happy to see, and it's not just unique to Illinois, I think you saw a lot of universities do the same thing, is when there was a shortage of ventilators, as an example, and you saw Jonathan do it at Michigan when there was a shortage of PPE. At Illinois, when there's a shortage of ventilators, I was really happy to see faculty members, staff, and community teams get together, and in the span of a week, they came up with a prototype, a working, functioning prototype of a ventilator, okay? And these are some top world-class faculty members from the College of Engineering to develop a functioning prototype of a ventilator called the Rapid Vent. And they put this out, and they made a call to somebody that would want to license this and bring it to market. And right now, and somebody stepped up, Belkin, right? The company that we all know that develops small devices that we use to plug in our computer and other things. They make lots of other things as well, but they've actually licensed that, and it's in production right now. So the Rapid Vent will actually be brought to market soon. It's actually, like I said, in production right now. But to see these world-class researchers get together from all different disciplines, from College of Medicine, Illinois College of Medicine, from the bioengineering department, from electrical engineering, to see people using their sensor technology to come up with that part of the device, from mechanical engineers, from all getting together in a span of a week, build a functioning device that could get approved to be brought to market, was really impressive to see that happen. And you can see this all over the country at different universities where people were getting together and solving real problems. Was pretty neat. And then just a couple of other examples to see other startups by academics doing really neat things. We had another team that had went through our I-Corps programs a couple of years ago, take technology that they had for filtering technology that they had developed for the military, actually make a pivot and take that technology and then use it for masks. And that's actually being used for mask technology, or masks now. And there's some other companies I could talk about as well that saw a need, make a pivot, and are actually working now in the COVID to help solve COVID-related problems as well. But these are all university-based teams that have responded to this need.
That's amazing, Jed, how they've responded so quickly, and have gone from basically an idea and concept and improving current technology to moving it through to a commercialization process. And if you think about traditionally how long it would take to do that, it could take months or half a year or something like that. And you all have just figured out how to do this within a matter of months, it seems.
Yeah, and it was neat also to see the government agencies like the NSF, like one of these teams that I could mention as well, that they actually used one of the National Science Foundation and the other government agencies came out with ways that they could rapidly respond to people that put proposals together to take their technologies and adapt them to COVID-19 related problems to solve them. And some of these teams responded to those calls for action, and they were able to turn it around really quickly. So it was great to see the whole ecosystem respond and in such a unified fashion. So it was really neat.
That's fabulous to see how the universities are responding. Michael, I have an intellectual property question that come to mind. After hearing about all the innovation that's going on within the universities, what are some practice tips that innovators should be thinking about right now as they transition from research to commercialization? What are some things they should be thinking about, whether they're with a university or outside in the private sector that's transitioning to commercialization of new innovations?
Yeah, in terms of in the current market, despite a lot of the negative things that are going on, it's actually an ideal situation for innovators looking to commercialize. So some of the considerations, startups are always looking for disruption. We have worldwide disruption right now. You have a strong demand for solutions in the space, and then you have disaggregated IP. So people haven't had an extensive opportunity to collect and aggregate IP, so there's a lot of opportunities. In terms of next steps or what do you do if you have a great solution and you want to kind of bring it to market, one of the first considerations, I'd look at the rights you have. Are you under a research and employment agreement? And you definitely want to respect those rights and operate within those. In terms of your particular solution, in light of the market factors, what's the competitive advantage? How do you differentiate yourself from other typical solutions? And then from the IP perspective, how do you protect that competitive advantage? What are the aspects of it in terms of, there aren't just patents, there's copyrights, trade secrets, various forms of protection. How are you protecting all of that? And then typically, what's your freedom to operate? Do you have a clear operating path? Are you going to be infringing other people's patents, trademarks, et cetera? Or do you have a clear path? And then also the inverse to that is where's the IP value? Are there a number of potential partners or competitors in that space? Is there synergistic value of the technology in terms of what are the paths to building that intellectual property? And also from a business perspective and in line with various investors, is the IP aligned with business value? So is that IP just in totally off market, or is there various opportunities within your current vertical or some of the parallel ones where it's more synergistic with the business?
Interesting. You mentioned something about freedom to operate investigations. I want to ask the next question to Dr. Lionel on that, but I'll come back to you with what is a freedom to operate investigation? What are the benefits of that? So let me follow up with a question with Dr. Lionel. A little while ago, there was mentioning about funding from NSF. And during our conversation the other day, we were talking about how the National Science Foundation is letting out bids, and universities are looking at, because there are a lot of solutions that they need solved, and they're willing to back those solutions. Can you tell us a little bit about, to the extent this is public information, can you tell us a little bit about any kind of recent NSF bids or offerings that have come out? And also tell us about who owns the intellectual property as a result of the university, creating something through an NSF grant. Could you share that perspective with our listeners?
Yeah. Oh, sure. And that's a great question, because I think there's often a lot of misconceptions in terms of kind of the ownership of research from federal funding. But yeah, so Jed mentioned the rapid grants that NSF has put out now, and so really has an accelerated process for anything that contributes towards addressing the COVID situation. So and they're not specific, so you can we've had rapid grants covering the one I mentioned, the continuous analysis of many cameras, rapid antibody tests, monitoring the performance and security and reliability of mobile networks, which are critical in this environment, surface decontamination, teaching and social support for engineering classes. So wide range. So really anyone that's got anything going, as Jed said, is pivoting over towards that. one of the other types of grants that are coming out now is that as labs are reopening, there are opportunities for supplemental grants. So these are grants built on an existing grant to help labs operate safely in the COVID-19 situation. So to the extent that there are additional equipment or other costs involved in operating and continuing the work on their existing grants, the federal agencies are stepping up to help with that. So, so I think this will be a bit of a continuing environment for a while. You know, typically federal grants have very much focused on, you know, developing science for very broad impact, which kind of encourages what Jonathan said is, you know, produce something which, hey, everyone will want one, because actually that's what we promised the federal agency when we started the research, that we're going to solve everyone's problem. And then when we get to commercialize it, we actually got to figure out, okay, which specific problem are you going to solve first? And that's what the I-Corps program is about. So I think we'll see more, you know, federal grant opportunities that focus on specific versus broader impact, and which I think is good for commercialization, because it's kind of hard to get someone to unbundle an all singing, all dancing prototype that they've developed to solve everyone's problem. So regarding the ownership, so much of this is covered under the Bayh-Dole Act, which is the Patent and Trademark Law Amendments Act, which actually requires that so inventions from, and I'm going to read my notes here to make sure I get it right. So inventions arising from federally funded research projects are required to be reported to the government agency, but it does permit the recipient of those grant funds to retain ownership of the inventions made under that, while also providing the government license to practice, you know, the subject invention. So, and this is very much the case for particularly NSF and NIH, that what is developed under their funding is something that the universities own and can take forward. You know, all three of our institutions have a very rapid process for the researchers to license that technology back from the university, so they can commercialize it or play a significant role in commercializing their research. And there are only a few instances where, you know, the government exercises its prerogative to sort of practice the discovery that's come out of the research. So a lot of freedom. It's a good deal. You know, we get millions of dollars, billions of dollars. I think, you know, Michigan's probably like 1.2 billion and
1.5.
1.5. Jed and I are probably in the, I don't know, 600, 700 million range, and you know, that's a nice R&D budget to have. And we work, you know, Jed talked about the I-Corps program. So we work with the universities across the Midwest as part of this program. And, you know, collectively, if we look at our institutions that are, albeit somewhat geographically distributed, you know, we have around $20 billion of research, R&D going on in these institutions. So if we look broader at the Midwest, you know, we have a huge ability to create sort of valuable technologies that can be commercialized. And we just happen to be a little further apart than they are on the East Coast and West Coast. But given we use Zoom so much, that doesn't matter so much now.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe that's something to take away from the COVID crisis. It's maybe level the playing field geographically in a lot of different ways with universities. So I find it fascinating that with the NSF grants, particularly even the RAPID grant that's just been put out, that the government allows the universities to own the intellectual property. So that's a very nice payday for you. Congratulations for that benefit. Dr. Fay, I have a similar question for you. I think I heard you say U of M has roughly 1.5 billion. Is that strictly NSF, or is that also NIH funding as well?
Yeah, that's all kinds of funding. Is 1.5 billion. Some of our research funding given comes from philanthropic sources. So that's the all-encompassing number that the university puts out.
Yeah.
The biggest bulk of that, though, is federally funded research from NSF and NIH.
Okay, good. Let's continue on with a conversation with you, Dr. Fay, about how has the innovation process changed during the COVID crisis, and how do you see it changing as we come out of this pandemic in the next, say, 3 to 6 months or maybe a year? How do you think this may have impacted innovation for the university? So you have to put on your crystal ball.
It's really interesting because, and of course my answer is colored by where I sit in the innovation pipeline. My organization, I sit pretty early in the pipeline when we're working with lab scientists and really just educating them about the commercialization process, getting them to think about their research and more in terms of, is there an innovation here, what that might be, who might care about my research. So I sit at the very earliest stages. I would say the biggest change that we've experienced is this move to a virtual environment, especially around the NSF ICOR program. Typically what we would do in that program was we would fly a bunch of researchers together to a big city like Chicago or DC, and we would all convene together. We'd have a kind of a 3-day boot camp. They would actually interview people in person. And then over the 7 weeks, they'd interview over 100 people in person about their innovation. Of course, in this environment, we can't do that. And so what's fascinating is you're like, well, wait, are we going to lose the impact of the program? And it turns out absolutely not. The program is actually probably stronger than ever. It seems like researchers are more keen than ever to commercialize their research. And because there's no travel component, they seem to have more time to actually do the interviews. And they're actually, the interview counts are even higher in the program now than they were before, which is mind-blowing. And they're getting to people that they probably couldn't get a meeting with in person, right? They're able to get to some executives or other people that you're like, wow, trying to get an in-person interview with that person would be nearly impossible. And you just got 30 minutes with that person. So I think in terms of that early stage process where we're trying to figure out where this research can go and who the customers are and who the stakeholders and what the value is, and really trying to nail down those really critical early questions, this move to a virtual environment has actually in some ways enhanced what we're able to do. I think the other key part of it is, Matthew, Jed and I have been partners for 4 or 5 years now in the ICOR program. We always were doing things virtually. But now, because we're teaching virtually, we're able to serve a much larger audience. We've worked with the Michigan Tech folks up in Houghton. They participate in our programs. We've got potentially tribal colleges in North Dakota that can participate in our programs in a way that they haven't in the past. So I think our reach and our ability to serve a very wide customer base with these really impactful programs has actually been increased through this virtualization and digitization process that we've gone through. So I'm actually pretty excited about for the future. I don't think we're going back. I think we'll go back and do some things in person, but we're probably going to stick with this online format so we can really reach these broad audiences where maybe it was a single researcher at an institution. It's like, wow, I can participate in this program now, which would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Jed, same question. How do you see the universities adapting through the crisis, and what's it look like going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually exactly the same thing. I was actually laughing the other day because with the ICOR program, not only did we take people or make people go do in-person interviews, we actually would tell them how awful and ineffective video conferences were. Now it's like, oh, forget what we used to say about that. They're actually phenomenal. They're so much better. And so, but I seriously laugh about that because we used to talk about how ineffective they were. But I think something that has changed is it's not that now video conferencing is all of a sudden better. It's that I think people are more used to it. And we're all used to, after doing this for months, we're all better at it and we're more used to it. And it's more acceptable. It's not that now we're forced to do it. So now we have to let people do it. It's actually, we're more comfortable and we're more used to it. That's all there is to it. And I think that just like Jonathan was saying, it's opened the door to people that haven't been able to participate in some of our programs in the past. And now they find them more accessible. I think now we're able to reach some researchers and people that wanted to participate but for whatever reason, couldn't bring themselves to get to the location where we were offering the programs. But now they just find it, that barrier has been lowered, and now they're able to participate. Let me give an example, another example. Like I do a workshop series over that I've been doing in person, but we've offered it online as well. So I speak at our Enterprise Works, which is our incubator on campus. And I do this to help people get government grants, to just say it in the simplest terms. And we allow people to join via webinar, and we've done this for years. And since COVID-19, we just done it online. The time's still the same, the content's still the same, except we offer it just online. And the participation was about triple the last time we did it. Hmm. And it's interesting. Now, it could just be that people are sitting in front of their computers, and so they're like, I'm bored, and I might as well listen to this guy. But I doubt it. I think there's a little bit more to it, that maybe people are just more, I don't know. I have my hypothesis why, but I think just things that this has just got people thinking in a different way, and just made it more acceptable for people to take the time, and they're more familiar with sitting down at Zoom and watching this content delivered in a certain way. And I don't think, like Jonathan said, I don't think we're going back. I think we may be doing hybrid things in a hybrid fashion, and have some things in person and allow people to participate remote. But I don't think we're going back, and I think we're going to be much better for it.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. From our perspective, it seems like we're not going back. This has allowed us to basically sharpen our tools and figure out how to use the latest technology that a lot of us had to really figure it out quickly about 10, 11 weeks ago. And we're moving forward, and as you are all testifying to, you're innovating. Your campuses are innovating, you're commercializing, you're solving problems and responding to grant requests. So it's very cool to see how the whole ecosystem is moving ahead. Very, very impressive. Michael, go ahead.
I was just going to add one more thing to Jed's thing. That the one downside we have seen to the video conferencing is the serendipity factor isn't quite what it used to be, because when you go to someone's office, you might bump into somebody else. They might be somebody else in the office. You get introduced to them. So there's a little bit more randomness when you're going in person that we don't see, because it's really a targeted kind of conversation between you and the other person. The other factor is sometimes if you really get in front of somebody that's very interested in what you're doing, that 15 minutes thought you had suddenly turns into 2 hours, and you got a factory tour, and there are other things you see. Mm-hmm. Whereas here, when we're all stacked with 30-minute Zoom calls, we're like, okay, this call's done. I got to move on to the next one, right? So those are the only two kind of downsides we've seen, but everything else holds. We said absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't think, I'd be surprised. I don't think we're going to ever go to, the programs we run will ever go to completely online. Right. And I think it'll always be some type of hybrid, because I think there's always an advantage to going and seeing somebody in person. Because in addition to what Jonathan was saying, just that extra out in the hallway, just after the meeting's done and you're just sitting there standing in the room talking, there's just so many extra things that happen there. So
yeah, I agree. Let me transition to Michael. Then I think we probably need to work towards our final question, because I see we're pushing 40 minutes or so roughly in our conversation, 45 minutes plus, I guess. Michael, I wanted you to speak briefly about a freedom to operate. We heard about a lot of new inventions being created and will be coming out of this crisis as a necessity due to what's going on because of the pandemic. You mentioned the word FTO, freedom to operate. What does a freedom to operate mean, and why is that important to either a startup, someone starting a business, or why is it important to an investor? We have investors online right now. Why would a FTO be important to them as well?
Yeah, it comes in all different types of forms, but the most valuable one from a business perspective typically looks at both risks and opportunities. So typical freedom to operate analysis, you do some searches and identify whether it's patents or other types of forms of IP that's relevant to the company. This would typically look at competitors and other valuable people in the space to determine what's applicable to the company, and then look at, do we need to redesign things? Do we need to reorient the product development? Something that provides an additional layer of value when you're looking at some kind of freedom to operate analysis, is actually looking at the IP opportunities. So this is the reverse scenario where you're actually looking at opportunities in the space as opposed to just risks. And so you're identifying white space. How do we orient the product, the company towards white space and drive value from the IP rather than just avoiding risks?
Sound like somebody's calling in there. Is that your phone, Michael?
Yeah, guilty as charged.
No worries. Hey, while you're catching that call there, I know you were previously in-house counsel at a medical device company and you ran their IP portfolio. Can you just share with our audience briefly the importance of white space and reviewing what white space actually is when you're doing your freedom to operate analysis?
Yeah, so that's typically the thing that's gonna, IP is, if it's just stagnant, it's overhead. So it's just, you're collecting IP, nothing's really happening to it, and potentially it provides counter leverage if somebody generates or initiates a dispute with you. When it's in-house, we looked at it as a revenue generator. Like, so how do we turn that from overhead to something that generates revenue? So one way of approaching it is you can look at, boil down the IP to its essence, and how do you apply that to maybe a prime market? But then also look at objectively at some of the other markets. For example, you may be in medical, but is the core technology applicable to robotics or other things? And so essentially looking at each piece of IP as an asset and how do you leverage value in your primary market or some of the ancillary ones. And, obviously the objective is to maximize the value across all of those.
Excellent. Okay. We're going to final question, Michael. My question for you finally was going to focus on the patent office and what they've done specially for innovators. But I'm going to ask Dr. Lionel to present his screen, if you would, and we're going to kind of do a final question right now with each of our panelists regarding funding opportunities. What's going on out there right now with your internal companies from the standpoint of fundraising opportunity? So Dr. Lionel put together this nice slide, and I'd like him to kind of just share with us briefly about some of the companies within the Purdue platform that are fundraising.
Yeah, glad to. So thank you for the opportunity. So just one thing I'd stress is that our universities are real engines of invention, but we all have centers and processes that I and Jed and Jonathan are involved with to help those inventions come to fruition and market. So, but we rely really heavily on outside partnerships. We generally don't expect our faculty to quit their jobs and be the CEO of a startup. They'll be the chief technology officer, chief scientific officer. So in order to move the technology forward, we need people that can take on those management roles, and we need funding. And so this is just a list of companies that a few of the companies that we have at Purdue that are at the stage of looking for somewhere between seed and A round financing. I won't talk to them all because I've put website links to all of them except for one which didn't have one. I'll talk to Adipo is actually one I particularly like. Colleague of mine, Professor Meng Deng, has a obesity treatment, and this is for very targeted reduction of fat cells. So for those of us that try and lose weight and we lose it everywhere except where we want to lose it, this is a technology that allows very targeted sort of fat reduction. And so he went through the I-Corps process and formed the company, and is now looking for funding to take it forward, as are all of these companies. One of the other ones I'd highlight is Novosteo. It's actually a company formed by Phil Lau. Phil Lau's lab at Purdue also formed one of our most successful exits acquired by Novartis a couple of years back for $2 billion, which was a kind of nice exit. If these are of interest to any of you that are looking for investments, I think I will be sending out information afterwards with, so you can contact the companies directly. By all means, contact me, but we'll also provide an additional contact for you.
Yeah.
While I've got the screen, I just want to add one thing to what Jonathan and Jed said about ICOR. We've sort of told you what it is, but what it does. One of the reasons that National Science Foundation put the ICOR process in place was to improve the sort of quality of participants in the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Research Grant, which is a seed fund that all of the federal science agencies have. And the impact of ICOR has been that compared with a national acceptance rate of about 14–15%, teams that go through the ICOR process are having a success rate in the order of 60–70%. And so, going through the process of connecting with potential customers, really understanding that you do have a commercial opportunity is having a huge success, huge impact on that particular seed fund and other sort of funding. But as an investor, what we look for is, is there really a market there? And has the company connected with it effectively? And that's what we do through ICOR.
Excellent. Well, thank you for explaining a little bit more about what ICOR does and what it is. Appreciate that. I'd like to transition to Dr. Fay with kind of final word. I didn't have a chance to talk with you about getting a slide, but are there some opportunities, or how can people get information about the different companies looking for funding? We like to connect the private sector with the universities, and here's your chance.
Yeah, there are really two vehicles that I would really look into at the university. Obviously, our Office of Tech Transfer and Mike Saratakis there is really the right contact. If you're interested in looking at the university IP portfolio and the companies spinning out of the university, more than happy to talk to you about the different companies coming out of U of M. So that's the right point of contact there. And then the other one I would say is the Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund, which is a fund jointly run by my office and Michigan Medicine. And so that's a seed fund. It's usually first money in. And probably many of you guys on the call have probably done syndicate rounds with MVBF. So I'm sure you know Hirak, who's the fund manager, who reports to me, and Brad Martin over in medicine. And that's another great spot to learn about perhaps companies that are a little later stage that might need some funding. So I think those two are the right point of contact. In terms of how funding has gone for our startups, I would say that our companies continue to do really well with conversations that were started prior to COVID-19. We've actually one of the people close to our center just closed a $15 million Series A yesterday. So funding is out there for strong teams with good ideas. But those conversations were started prior to COVID-19. I think it'd be a little tough to start with someone that you don't know right now.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. I will say that I have attended a number of virtual pitches that typically you would be attending in person with the various angel networks here in Michigan. And they move those all now to the Zoom platform, basically, or WebEx or what have you.
That's great.
And, so now I understand they're doing more pitches because they can get you more often because you're seated at home in your chair 24/7. So. Jed, I'll let you have the last say from the standpoint of what you want to share with us with any opportunities with the private sector out there.
Leave it to the business professor to make a fancy slide and make us look bad. I've got a couple of companies that I can send out as well when Matthew sends his slide. You can add it to the list. Yeah, I think we're seeing as the companies that are out there raising funds that it's definitely slowing down. We had several in our ecosystem that were getting close to closing to signing term sheets, and then had them rescinded right at the end. And so there's several of them that are out there raising, but definitely slowed down. I think that's the sense that I'm getting from the ones in our ecosystem. But we've got 3 or 4 that are really interesting startups that are out there raising funds. I would say if there's anybody on the phone that's interested in getting involved with our ecosystem, you just have to reach out. We've got the enterprise work. If somebody wanted to get involved, the easiest way to do it is that I would do if I were in your position is reach out to me. I can connect you with our Enterprise Works, which is our university incubator on our research park. At any given time, there's about 45 to 50 startups from campus, affiliated to campus, that are in the incubator. And they're everything from, a cybersecurity startup to something in ag tech, precision agriculture. There's everything that in the incubator there. And they're all early stage, because once you reach a certain point at 3 to 5 years, you have to graduate into something, somewhere else in the community. But you can come down, you can tour Research Park, see a bunch of companies while you're there, but just reach out and we're happy to connect you with something you're interested in.
Good. In fact, if our panelists, I'm not panelists, I'm sorry, but our attendees would like to look at the chat line, there's contact information being put in there right now. And we'll follow up with a little e-blast later with these comments and connections to the participants. Michael, just a quick last word. I understand there's a lot of innovation going on. How has the patent office responded? I understand they've done something special for inventors in the last few weeks in view of the COVID crisis by allowing them to get their patent applications through the process quicker. Can you just give us a quick 15-second update on that, please?
Yeah, it's just a quick note. There's basically 3 tranches of things that the USPTO is helping with. They're doing expedited processing. They're promising 6 to 12 months for COVID-related technologies on the prevention or treatment. Secondly, there's extensions. So if you're impacted by COVID and unable to make the filing deadlines, they're now pushing it out for certain entities out 1 month to, I believe it's July 1st. And then lastly, there's the USPTO licensing marketplace for COVID-related stuff. They'll help you license your invention. Right now, there's 212 technologies or patent applications on there. It's something interesting to think about.
Yeah, excellent. So the patent office is responding. That's great to hear. Michael, thank you for that update. I just wanted to say thank you very much from Purdue, University of Michigan, and Jed from University of Illinois. And I got a shout out to my Big Ten alma mater here. Go Purdue! Michael and I are both Purdue grad engineers, and as well as Dr. Lionel. It's been fun talking to you all this past week, and we're looking forward to the Big Ten playing some games here this fall, hopefully. And just want to say boiler up. And this concludes our Michael. Yeah.
Yeah, go Boilers.
Yeah, all right, boiler up.
Jonathan and Jed. Sorry.
So hey, this concludes our panel discussion today. This will be rebroadcast on the Fishman Stewart YouTube channel. We'll get this follow-up information out to you all that's in our chat room here, so they have a way of following up with our great panel here today. We thank them for their time, and this has been a great conversation about university innovation during the COVID crisis, and we appreciate your time. And so this concludes our webinar. Stay safe. This is Doug Malone saying take care, and take care of others.